Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Welcome to another episode of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm your host, Sean Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Today, we're diving into a crucial topic that resonates deeply within our farming communities: family business succession planning, otherwise known as farm transition. Joining us today is Cindy Radu of Cindy Radu Advisory Limited. She's an expert in facilitating these often complex and emotional transitions. Succession planning is more than just tax strategies and investment advice and a bunch of numbers. It's about understanding the family's overall goals, ensuring effective communication, and preparing the rising generations for their future roles. In this episode, we'll discuss the importance of seeing the big picture, the value of external facilitation in family meetings, and the benefits of collaborative conversations between advisors and family members. Cindy will also share some practical tips and resources, including her recommendation of the book Farm Whisperer for ag families. So let's get started and explore how to preserve our families and perpetuate our farms with Cindy Radu. Cindy, welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you today.
Yeah, important topic. And you got a lot of experience dealing with a lot of different companies on, of all shapes and sizes. And, right now we're talking to farmers and ranchers that are either trying to take over that family business, or maybe they're trying to, get that transition to happen. A lot of times we jump into the process. And first, though, we kind of need to set the stage for the transition process, that preparation part. I guess, what are the components of setting that stage properly to increase the probability that this goes well?
Yeah, it's a really important point. The tendency, and given my background, my tendency in the past would have been to really jump into what I refer to as the technical stuff, right? So often you'll have a lead advisor whose primary skill set will be maybe tax planning or investment advisory or insurance structuring, all really super important in terms of that succession planning, wealth transfer planning. But what we're missing that's really, really critical is understanding the big picture. And it's not just the big picture of the parents, but the big picture of the family as a whole, and what we refer to as rising generations. So the children, grandchildren, great grandchildren, depending on sort of your trajectory in your family tree, what they know and don't know, and assumptions they might be making, so that we get it right. We get it right, and we have the opportunity to get all the voices heard. Not everybody's going to get exactly what they want, but at least we want people to feel heard and have had their voices in part of the process, so we don't get it really wrong.
Okay, so what does that look like? Because I think a lot of times, every family business will probably say, you know what, one thing that would help this family business out is more communication or better communication. But that's kind of vague and can be defined differently by everybody. So what does it actually look like?
Yeah, so you nailed it, communication, but how do you communicate, and what are you communicating about? And, this is, often a top-down thing where a parent is, maybe telling their children, what's going to happen. So from my perspective, and there's a number of advisors like me in Canada who have a very similar approach, where what we do is we really help draw out some of these thoughts and present opportunities or things to think about in a different way. And that'll often start with individual meetings with all the family members. So they don't feel maybe as intimidated that, other people in the room are going to jump in, or their voice won't be heard, or they're going to ask, I hate the term dumb question, but, a lot of times we internalize it that way. So just creating that safe space to have a conversation, to actually find out what's on people's minds, and get some of that stuff, tease some of that stuff out and let them ask questions from a neutral person, because I don't have any skin in the game, right?
Right.
My goal is happy families, happy clients, family businesses, especially agriculture, in this country are critical to our economic success as a country. So that communication then folds into preparing for a first family meeting. And I will never say Sean said this and Cindy said that and somebody else said, whatever they said. But what I do is I look for common themes of things I've heard about. Well, our family doesn't really communicate all that well, or we're really, really good at communicating and coming together around social events, but some conversations we don't even go there because we know it's just going to lead to some sort of a conflict or an escalated conversation. So that process of hearing everybody, letting them feel validated, then getting together in a room and sharing that, but that has to run alongside of, we do actually need to understand the structures that families have and how things are set up. So, what are their companies? How are they set up? Who actually are the owners of this company? What are the wills looking like right now? Are we exposed or vulnerable? Perhaps we don't have a shareholders agreement at all, or the shareholders agreement that we have really isn't suitable for our family when we actually go and look at how the terms would roll out if we had to execute some clause in that shareholders agreement. So there's a lot to it, right? But really having that opportunity for individual conversation, clarity on structuring, and then to come together as a family and have somebody facilitate a meeting that may involve multiple advisors to really hear the questions that everybody has and hear the answers from the advisors and hear what other people in the family are saying, so that it's not like I don't know, when you were a kid, like when I was a kid, it was kind of, we called it the telephone line game, where I'd
Yeah,
whisper
yeah.
in your ear and you'd start it with spaghetti, and by the time it got to the other end, it would be grapefruit or something.
Yeah.
So that's what I always call it. It's like, we don't want a telephone line game. We want everybody to hear the answers firsthand, because otherwise you're going to have to try and interpret a really long meeting with a lot of information to somebody, and it's probably not going to translate really well.
And you said a couple things here that I want to hit on. One, you said facilitation. So I think a lot of farm businesses, they err more on like, hey, I'm the major shareholder, head of the family. This is what we're going to do. Versus having someone external do that facilitation. Now, it doesn't mean that the first the first scenario I lined out can't work, but that facilitator would add an element of probably making things go a bit smoother, provided they're a really good facilitator.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the number one, we all carry our baggage into a room, right? And could be really nice baggage. Some of it's maybe not so nice, right? And so preconceived notions. Whereas I think, I mean, I personally, if I'm in a meeting with somebody that's new and interesting, and I think, oh wow, I've got an opportunity to learn here, if I'm willing to listen, um, and be, maybe have some of my assumptions change, then that facilitator, you have a skilled facilitator in the room, can really make that a very positive experience for people. And if you have somebody who's already in the family, again, we've kind of got this taint of, oh, here he goes again, or here she
Yeah.
goes again, or this is going to open that same story we've, heard 25 times now, or however many times. Which, stories are really important, but you also don't know what you don't know. And there's an awful lot to know when you're starting to look at wealth transition.
You also mentioned getting all of the advisors in the room,
Mm,
collaboration amongst the people that are doing the advising. And so typically this whole process is led by the accountant. It's led by the lawyer. Those would be the two main ones that are typically the focal point of this, which also puts us in a position where we leap forward to the structure, the tactic, the tool, the outcome that a lawyer or an accountant would focus on. That's their area of expertise. So that makes sense. Talk about the importance, though, of having the group of advisors, and who are some of those people? Like, what is that? We say group, like I think of insurance, if there's somebody in that area, but who are some of the others, and why is it important to all have them there at the same time?
Yeah, so you wouldn't necessarily have every single advisor at a first family meeting. Typically, what I've actually found that's really helpful in an initial family meeting is somebody more on the financial planning and investment side, for the family that does have that bigger picture that's not, again, going to go into really technical tactic piece. They're kind of floating up above going, yeah, okay, well, these are all your assets. These are all your, your insurance. This is your insurance coverage and how that would work. And these are some things that we've been looking at and assessing some financial literacy levels within the family. Just not doing any testing or anything at that point, but they can speak in a language and that's their specialty. Inevitably there's questions about that, and I shouldn't be the person that's answering those questions, for a variety of reasons. But when you start having these really beautiful collaborative relationships, where the advisors are keen to be part of an experience like that with the family. What it does is, from the advisor side, it's brilliant because it creates stickiness, I call it, with the rising generation. Because typically the experience is that it's the advisor with the parents, right?
Mhm.
And the people who are really impacted by these plans are the rising generation, and yet they've never had their voices heard from by those advisors. So it's advantageous for the advisors that way, but it's brilliant for the rising gen because this is a really safe way to go, okay, well, that wasn't so bad after all. Like there was a lot of language in there that I didn't initially understand, but when I'm facilitating meetings, and because I have that kind of a background, I know where people are going to start to glaze over, and I can just interject and maybe layer on a bit of plain English or tie it back into another scenario that I've worked on. So it doesn't feel so weird,
Yeah.
or that, we're the only family that has these, these concerns or these problems or these issues or these dynamics. It's normal, right? It
Yeah.
would be abnormal if everybody got along on the surface all the time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
it just it doesn't happen, and that's unrealistic. So we
Well,
need to figure out how to have these really great collaborative conversations, open conversations, to agree to disagree sometimes, and to find out why we disagree and how we can move forward, to get to an outcome that we can all live with and hopefully be really content with.
yeah, you just identified something. I thought of, oftentimes, I think of like, okay, who's the client? And like you said, it's the major shareholder is the client. Everybody else is just kind of a stakeholder. But the actual impacts of what this looks like on the other end is that rising generation, as you mentioned. And also I think you made a very important point about different financial literacy
Mm.
amongst stakeholders. And sometimes I think that is very, very much, we're gonna freeze the commons and we're gonna convert the prefs and we're gonna freeze the estate and we're gonna do this and move this over here. Da, 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 da. It's all gonna be great. And everyone leaves the meeting. Majority of people leaving the meeting say, I have no clue what we just decided was a great idea.
I'm more confused. I'm more confused leaving than I was when I came in. Yeah, absolutely. And so picking up on the who is the client thing, that is a critical point. And for me, that was a big part of the reason why I've gone non-practicing with the Law Society, why I dropped my FCA. Like I don't do that type of work, and I don't want to be seen as doing that type of work, um, in the eyes of other advisors. In other words, I'm not competing for your work. I'm not drafting documents. I have no no skin in the game on these documents other than clarity and getting the outcome that the family wants to get. So it's I feel, not every advisor will agree, but I feel like I can have different conversations with the family than a lawyer or an accountant, perhaps with mom and dad, when I can have that conversation with the family and then interface really nicely with the advisors because I speak their language too.
We'll get back to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, but first a word from our sponsor, RBC Royal Bank.
This episode of Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. No matter where you're at in your agricultural career, succession has probably crossed your mind. Whether you have an idea to help the next generation thrive or just want to get a head start, RBC can help tailor a succession plan for you. Ensure that ownership of your operation, as well as your skills and knowledge, are easily passed on. Visit rbc.com/succession to learn more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw in our own family, and I've seen, heard from the audience a lot on this topic. And one of the is having, I mentioned about the collaboration, all the, the different advisors, but it is important to get them talking, because if you're just constantly having these one-offs, right? That's where you create mistakes. And it's like, oh, why did we set up this structure? This is costing us actually way more in tax because we never talked to this other person that actually would have probably told us that we couldn't do it this way. And so that's where that holistic part, I think, not only does it speed up and you get out of these sort of he said, she saids and, just accumulating the billable hours through the roof. It does kind of allow you to be more on the same page, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, there's a difference between cooperation and collaboration. I would say the vast majority of advisors that I've encountered in my lifetime have been very cooperative, but it tends to be a bit more of a handoff than it is a true collaboration, in the sense that it's like, okay, I've done my part. Here's a bit of background on it. Over to you. I expect you will have some questions and come, back to me, and that's fine. And we'll have a meeting, and then you'll finish up the project, and somebody will do a final review. But again, you've not really had a person in that mix who's touched every family member, right? You've had one or two advisors who've spoken with dad or mom and dad. Still, typically in my experience, it's the father, or the patriarch figure.
Yep.
And so you're just not going to get the influence and the input of other people, because they're just going to think, oh well, it's just going to be done that way anyway.
Right. And you've got, so you've got and broad brush strokes here, but that older generation focused on taxes, financial costs, like they're, do I have enough to get to the end of the runway, however long that is?
Mhm.
All viable, very, very viable concerns. You've other, you've maybe have, there's kids that are in the business. Maybe you have in-laws in the business. You've got in-laws out of the business. You've got kids out of the business. It can be very complicated managing all of those relationships, and they're all judging success here a little bit differently.
Mhm.
Now, based on their own personal background and maybe their own financial status, that can be a factor too. But we've seen a lot of family farm succession deals go awry where, there's the people that are on it working in the operation and the people working out of the operation. And that's where there's kind of collisions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's stuff, there's information that gets dropped. It doesn't get communicated, often not because they're trying to keep any secret. It's just they're busy, right? We get up, we're out the door, we're working hard all day. Do we want to come home and talk about work? And even what are we going to talk about? Again, you don't know what you don't know. And, you have these advisors around you, so you think everything is just being done and it's taken
Yeah.
care of. Oh, it's taken care of because we have a will in place. We already have a will, therefore it's taken care of. But if I asked, I say this and it's not because it's like a gold star in my cap or anything, but a feather in my cap, that whenever I've explained a structure to a family, I can't recall a time when I've explained it and the family has gone, oh yeah, that's what we thought would happen. Never. And how would you, right? And it, because rarely until there's a death or incapacity is the other one that we really need to be talking about, especially in not especially, but in farm families as well. Like you could have somebody who's mentally or physically incapacitated, and how have we planned, how have we planned for that? Um, but I think that, the point just generally is that we do need to be having these conversations. We need to be working collaboratively. Um, we need to be working cross-generationally. And this isn't something that happens overnight. This is something that you can actually start quite young with kids, even pre-teen. You're not going to put them in a family meeting for 8 hours, but you can talk about things like values and, what are we about as a family and how do we show up in our community and how do we show up around the dinner table, and age appropriate education. As you talked about financial literacy, you can start that really young with
Yeah.
kids, right? So it's a fun time. It's a really, really exciting time in this space, I think, for families who are willing to say, kind of dip their toe in the water and say, maybe there's a better way to do this. And let's find an advisor who works a bit differently alongside our existing team.
Yeah, and the important piece here too is we see this, we talk about farm succession a lot because we're always trying to make sure there's that, that next generation is able to take over, right? And be a part of the industry. And you're making sure there's that next upcoming generation of farmers and ranchers across the country. Um, but this is also an issue just as much in small business, family small business, in all different sorts of industries, correct? This isn't like just a farm issue.
Not at all. It is not at all a farm issue, but every industry has its own sort of unique challenges, right? And yeah, so family businesses generally, I mean, it gets really interesting where you have a bit of a mix. I'm working with the family right now that was a mom and dad owned the business, and they've now sold a big chunk of it, the vast majority of it, to some of their employees. And wow, what a tremendous thing to do, and an opportunity for those employees that worked really, really hard, but they'll be deer in the headlights. Like now they're owners. Now they're, that now they've got debt to buy into a company. Now you've got not just one family, but you've got, maybe 4 or 5 families that are, you know, owners directly or indirectly in this business. And it's exciting, but holy cow, that's complicated.
Being in a new seat, indeed. So we've talked a lot of here about things that you should do to kind of set that stage.
Mhm.
What are some things to wrap up here that you should not do?
You should not wait another day until you start doing some of this stuff, even if that just means, calling you, calling me, calling somebody and saying, I listened to this podcast and I want to find out a bit more about this. Can you direct me to a book or some other podcasts that I could listen to? One that is this book, and I think I mentioned it to you before. It's called The Farm Whisperer, specific for ag families. And it's an older book, but I think you can still get it. And I'll send you the information on it. But it's called The Farm Whisperer: Secrets to Preserving Families and Perpetuating Farms by David Specht, Specht. And it's written in a very relatable format, with lots of great like blank space to write down reflections and commitments of things that you're actually going to do. So I encourage people to, pick up at least one for their family. Maybe they pick up a couple in case people like to scribble like I do all through my book and make them illegible for anybody else. But again, lots of great resources out there, and I'm sure we can cobble together something as an attachment to your podcast.
Hey, great stuff. Well, Cindy, thanks so much for joining us here today on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. A heartfelt thank you to Cindy Radu for sharing her invaluable insights on family business succession planning. As we've learned today, effective communication, understanding the big picture, and collaborative planning are really key to a successful transition. Succession planning is not just about the technical aspects. It's not at all, actually. It's about so much more. It's about preserving family values, goals, and a legacy of our farms for future generations. If you found today's discussion helpful, please subscribe to our podcast, tell your friends, leave a review, share this with somebody that has to hear this. We'd really appreciate it. If you do have any feedback on what you heard here today, we'd love to hear from you. You can also send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can call the Real Ag Feedback line at 855-776-6147. You can find more episodes of this podcast by going to mindyourfarmbusiness.com. Thanks to RBC Royal Bank again. And until next time, keep on minding your farm business.